Hey there, everyone. The Pacific Ocean can seem calm now, but what if I said that not so long ago, this peaceful region was once the scene of great tension? Back in the late 1800s, Japan started expanding its power, setting off a chain of events that we're about to explore together. But what exactly kicked off all these tensions and led to a massive conflict?
Hello and welcome, listeners. Today, we're diving into an exciting series where we unravel the layers of history and understand the dynamics of the Pacific during those tumultuous years. We've got several chapters lined up that will peel back each layer, starting from Japan's early days of expansion. But before we delve deeper, let's look at how it all began back in the 1800s.
Let's dive into Japan's early expansion at the end of the 1800s. Japan started to rise rapidly as a powerful nation. They were not just expanding their territories, but actively seeking out resources. This aggressive growth marked the beginning of Japan becoming an empire, striving to enhance its influence and control over Asia. They weren't just content with their mainland, they wanted more.
By the 1940s, Japan's expansion reached new heights. They strategically seized control of numerous islands in the Pacific. This was not just about power, but about resources. Japan heavily depended on the United States for vital materials like oil and metal, which they couldn't find enough within their lands. This dependency added another layer to the tensions brewing in the Pacific region.
Japan's relationship with Nazi Germany further complicated the situation. This alliance made the United States uneasy as Japan's aggression in the region escalated. The U.S. didn't sit back. They reacted to Japan's moves by initiating economic sanctions. This was a form of pressure, limiting Japan's access to crucial resources and putting a strain on their ambitions.
These sanctions hit Japan hard. They found themselves in a position where securing resources became an urgent need. With limited supplies of oil and metal, their expansion plans were at risk. This set the stage for Japan to start considering more drastic measures. They began to develop plans for securing land rich in resources, setting the groundwork for their next move.
As tensions rose and Japan found itself squeezed by sanctions, they crafted a bold new plan. This plan was about more than just expansion. They framed it as liberating Asia from European control. They painted a picture of freedom and prosperity, promising to rid the region of European rule, claiming it was for the greater good. This narrative served to convince many at home of the righteousness of their cause.
This aggressive strategy unfolded in December 1941, a time marked by Japan's widespread attacks. They launched coordinated strikes across various regions, each chosen for its strategic value. Among these, the surprise assault on Pearl Harbor stands out. No one expected Japan would strike so far or so boldly, but they did. This move caught the U.S. off guard, crippling a large part of their Pacific fleet and throwing the region into chaos.
Despite the chaos, Japan experienced immediate successes. Their swift actions facilitated early victories and secured them strategic territories. This rapid expansion and initial dominance boosted their confidence. However, their actions had consequences. The U.S. and its allies were no longer passive observers. They declared war against Japan. Now, Japan faced a united front seeking to curb its advances.
The damage to the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor was severe. This not only weakened American naval power temporarily, but allowed Japan to press on and fortify its new holdings. All the while, Hitler's declaration of war against the U.S. compounded global tensions. Over 7 months, Japan gained and consolidated several key territories, establishing a vast empire that seemed unstoppable for a time.
After securing vast territories in the Pacific, Japan set its sights even further east. They aimed to cripple the United States' capacity in the region by targeting the Midway Atoll. It was a strategic location that they believed would severely weaken the U.S. if captured. Japan felt confident knowing their navy was powerful, and capturing Midway would create a defensive barrier, giving them the upper hand in the Pacific.
Absolutely. And what Japan didn't expect was just how much their plans were compromised before they even began. Thanks to America's skillful codebreakers, the United States was well aware of Japan's intent and strategies ahead of time. This critical intelligence changed the whole game for the U.S. forces, allowing them to prepare adequately for the upcoming clash at Midway.
The Battle of Midway wasn't just a simple clash of ships and planes. It was a test of naval tactics and innovation. Over 4 intense days, both sides fought fiercely. The U.S. skillfully implemented surprising tactics that caught the Japanese off guard. Despite Japan's initial confidence, the U.S. managed to use their limited resources wisely, turning the situation around and countering Japan's moves efficiently.
In this pivotal battle, Japan lost 4 major aircraft carriers, which was a devastating blow. This loss shifted the momentum of the Pacific War significantly. It marked a turning point, the first major defeat for Japan's navy, which had seemed unbeatable till then. With their naval power reduced, Japan's capacity to hold their territorial gains started to falter, making room for a successful U.S. counterstrategy.
As we're discussing the U.S. strategies in the Pacific, it's important to recognize the vast distances involved. Moving troops and supplies across the ocean was no easy task. Japan faced similar challenges, especially with their newly expanded territories. Supply routes were long and fragile, and sustaining this expansive empire required substantial resources to flow back to the mainland. This very reliance became one of Japan's key weaknesses as the war progressed.
Exactly. This weakness led the United States to develop the island-hopping strategy. Instead of confronting the heavily defended islands head-on, they focused on strategically targeting less fortified islands. This allowed them to move closer to Japan while simultaneously disrupting these critical Japanese supply lines. By choosing their targets wisely, they could conserve resources and position themselves advantageously in the Pacific.
The brilliance of this strategy was in its logistics. By targeting and taking these more manageable islands, the U.S. could establish bases to launch attacks on Japanese supply ships. This approach was effective because it cut Japan off from vital resources, leading to shortages in food, ammunition, and medical supplies. As a result, some Japanese strongholds became isolated, with their forces starving and unable to continue the fight.
By focusing efforts on supply lines rather than waging full-scale assaults on each island, the United States managed to weaken the Japanese empire significantly. They avoided unnecessary large battles, reducing casualties and expenses. Strategic victories were achieved through cleverly planned operations that isolated Japan's forces and lowered their capacity to maintain the war effort. The tide was turning, setting the stage for further U.S. advances.
Continuing from our last discussion, as the U.S. advanced through the Pacific, they were getting closer and closer to Japan itself. This proximity allowed them to introduce new technology like the advanced B-29 bombers. These aircraft were capable of carrying massive loads of bombs over long distances, reaching deep into the Japanese mainland. This technological advancement meant that Japan was now within striking distance from U.S. forces, significantly affecting the dynamics of the war.
And as Japan faced these continuous advances, their strategies took a more desperate turn. We started seeing reckless tactics, especially the infamous kamikaze or suicide missions. These missions were meant to cause as much destruction as possible, regardless of the cost in lives, and had a terrifying psychological impact on U.S. forces. The sheer determination of these actions showed how far Japan was willing to go to resist defeat, creating a serious challenge for the U.S.
Despite the desperate tactics, Japan was losing more and more territory. The United States was preparing for a possible invasion of the Japanese mainland, understanding that any such operation would be incredibly costly. This would involve huge numbers of resources and troops, and there was a real concern about the potential human cost involved. The fall of island after island showed that Japan's defenses were weakening, although they were certainly not yet broken.
Okinawa was one of the final strategic points before reaching the mainland. The battle for Okinawa was crucial, as it was the last real barrier before a direct approach to Japan. Japanese forces knew this and prepared extensive defenses. They used the rugged terrain to their benefit, building complex tunnels, bunkers, and other defensive structures, making the coming battle one of the toughest yet for American troops who were pushing ever closer.
As we learned from the Battle of Okinawa, the cost of invading the Japanese mainland would have been extremely high. The fierce resistance and extensive fortifications showed just how serious Japan was about defending their homeland. It wasn't just a military operation, it was a societal effort involving civilians who were ready to fight. The staggering number of casualties on both sides highlighted the challenges ahead if the U.S. decided to push forward with a direct invasion strategy.
Absolutely. This forced the U.S. to consider its options carefully. Invading Japan directly meant enormous loss of life. However, just as the tides seemed most challenging, the geopolitical landscape shifted. The Soviet Union announced its intention to join the war against Japan. This looming Soviet involvement posed both a logistical opportunity and a complex strategic challenge, adding pressure on the U.S. to end the war quickly and decisively.
With the Soviet entry looming, the U.S. government faced a difficult decision. They had recently tested a new weapon in the New Mexican desert, the atomic bomb. This bomb could potentially end the war swiftly without a costly invasion. President Truman and his advisors debated the use of this powerful weapon. They considered both the potential to save thousands of American lives and the message it would send, not only to Japan, but also to the Soviets about U.S. power.
The decision was made, and in August 1945, the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was unimaginable, with tens of thousands of lives lost in an instant. The horrifying destruction and loss of civilian life forced Japan to reconsider their stance on surrender. As the reality of continued Soviet advances and the new threat from atomic weapons set in, Japan finally chose to surrender unconditionally, marking the end of a very trying and costly war.
It's important to reflect on the lessons learned from the war we've discussed. The past offers us clear examples of how unchecked expansion and aggression can lead to devastating conflicts. Today, we are seeing tensions in the Pacific region rise again, reminiscent of the past. As we consider these current dynamics, it's crucial to remain aware and informed. Stay tuned for our upcoming stories, where we'll dive deeper into these ongoing issues and bring you more insights.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey through history. Your engagement means a lot to us. If you've enjoyed our podcast, please make sure to subscribe to stay updated. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to leave a comment and let us know your takeaways from our discussion. Also, don't forget to hit the like button to support us in bringing you more insightful stories. We look forward to having you with us next time.